Hey everyone, Elia here. This is a conversation I had with William C. Anderson. I last had him on in early 22, so it's already been 4 years now. At the time, it was to talk about his book, The Nation on No Map, Black Anarchism and Abolition, in which we spoke about the specificity of Black anarchism and how it can help inform a broader anti-authoritarian and abolitionist and pro-liberation worldview across the board. It is focused in the United States, as William is from Birmingham, Alabama. So of course it has that angle, but to be honest, as someone who lives in the UK, I have found a lot to learn from his work. This includes his column for prismreports.org called Another Way Out, hence the title of this episode, in which he explores the systemic crises that keep on being generated by the systems in which we live, whether they be patriarchy, white supremacy, capitalism, the nation state, and so on and so forth. I highly recommend them. I will of course include them in the show notes. And before we start this conversation, I would just like to share a couple of quick updates. One, my class on Lebanese politics and history is now in its second week. By the time you're listening to this, it's probably second or third week. We will have 5 weeks in total, so we're halfway through. I am going to announce the next class soon. If you're interested in learning about recent Lebanese politics and history and how it relates to the wider region and indeed the wider world, from an anti-authoritarian perspective, i.e. my perspective. I'm not just from Lebanon, as listeners of this podcast know, but my PhD was on post-war Lebanon specifically. So I do come at this from a certain perspective that is, I would say, fairly well informed. And as I think the current class would testify, I try and keep it pretty personal, informal, and interactive as much as possible. So you don't really have to know anything about Lebanon to get something from it. At the very least, that's the hope. So if you're interested in that, I will soon have a section on the website that is pretty well organized that will give you everything you need. But in the meantime, since I'm still working on it, if this interests you, I can at the very least put you on a waiting list. And when things are set up, I will send you just one email, not more than that, telling you what it's about. And you can register your interest if that is something that you're interested in. In the meantime, I have already recorded an episode on the Friday Times, which you can listen to, in which I talk about the class. And there's also a written version of that on my newsletter, hauntologies.net. I will include all of those in the show notes. So if you're interested in any of this, all you need to do is to send me one email on ayoub@thefridaytimes.com. Again, that's ayoub@thefridaytimes.com. Or send me a message on Signal. My username is ayoub.02. That's ayoub.02. One more thing, I'm currently working on diversifying my source of income, and I know that's not a conversation that anyone really likes to be honest, talk about or probably listen to, so I'll be brief. There already is a Ko-fi page where you can just support me there. As of now, there are no perks or benefits or whatnot, but anyone who does support me, once those perks and benefits are set up, you will automatically get them. So if you want to do that, you can just go on kofi.com/Elia Ayoub. The link will be, of course, in the show notes. And I'm slowly but surely working on also having merchandise related to the Friday Times set up on the website. When I'm closer to being ready, I will talk about it more. And yeah, I will let you go now, and I hope that you enjoyed this conversation. I personally took a lot from it, and I think that you will as well. Stay safe, everyone, and take care.
My name is William C. Anderson. I am a writer, and I am a person who is actively trying to do my part in the struggle to make the world around us a better place.
And boy, does it need that kind of work these days, especially.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, almost 4 years have passed since I last have had you on, and I was actually double checking that because I found it hard to believe. Um, I've been reading your work since on and off, including your Another Way Out series, which I would definitely love to talk about if you don't mind.
of course.
Um, I guess just first, more broadly, like just general reflections. I mean, 4 years, meaning what? It was early 2022 last time we spoke.
Hmm.
So much has happened since, right? And obviously, especially in the past few months, even if we like only focus on the United States here, so much has happened. So how have you been thinking about all of this?
Um, it's a lot. It's a lot to think about. And
Mm,
unfortunately, a lot of the things that have transpired, a lot of the things that have taken place have been very unsurprising for me. And I don't say that to sound overly confident. I say that because I had been expecting them based on a number of different trends and a number of different kind of currents that I had been observing in US politics in the years leading up. And a lot of that is what informed my writing, The Nation on No Map, which is coming up on its fifth anniversary this year, actually, too.
amazing.
And so much of what I was trying to accomplish when I was working on that book was a kind of warning of a number of different things that are now playing out in the United States, not just with relation to fascism, but a number of the different social and societal problems that have also risen up strongly with ultra nationalist currents amongst Black people, with a lot of the sectarian divisions amongst the kind of denominational left deepening, with a number of just different ways of people separating themselves and digging deeper into this anti-intellectualism that was also getting stirred up. It's just all of those things that I was anticipating in so many ways in that text came true. With ICE, I also was thinking about immigration a lot when I was working that and how that was going to play out. So many of those things are just a reality in the worst ways. There's been things that also I didn't expect that are playing out. And yeah, it's just it's a real mess. It's extremely disturbing. And in terms of the column I have with Prism, Another Way Out, that's a place where I'm trying to keep thinking through these things and updating my analysis, revisiting different parts of what I've been thinking about, and try to just stay in touch with struggle and keep putting forward a perspective that lends itself to folks actually having practical and thoughtful ways of approaching these problems that they might be able to share with me and other people who I learned from as
Mm.
well.
And in terms of, we'll definitely get into the column in a second, but in terms of predicting a lot of it, I would say this, a lot of it as well has been unsurprising to me. I guess there was always a part of me that always, let's say that even my expectations have been surpassed. Let's put it that way. What do you account at the very least for those who haven't listened to that first episode, who haven't read your book, which I will of course include in the show notes. We did focus on the book back then anyway. What would you account for, like basically what did you get right? Is it like an understanding of power, of state power, that sort of thing? Is it the specificity of the American experience, especially when it comes to, I hate saying the American experience, like when it comes especially to like white supremacy or all of the above? What was it in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the biggest thing um, that I would reflect on with regard to the nation on no map as having been kind of a really key part of the analysis that I was putting forward about what was to come. A big part of that book is focused on making an argument that Black people in the United States, but also throughout the Americas, did not need to be invested in a nation state project or nation building as it relates to the state, whether that is through a national socialist liberation sort of project, or whether it's through an investment in U.S. nationalism as we know it. And the reason I was making that argument was because Black people are in a specific set of conditions that inform me making an argument towards us embracing a stateless identity because of the fact that we have been rendered stateless by being subjected to this constant historical struggle to be accepted as citizens and as a part of the US project, which we've never actually accomplished. So, since I'm arguing about the descendants of enslaved Africans, not just in the US, but throughout the Americas, really being able to embrace a stateless identity, I think that, when you look at stateless peoples around the world, so many stateless populations reject the nation state and state building because they know what the nation state does because they were rendered stateless by these these types of projects and but by state violence and colonialism and its origins, and the state is a colonial instrument. It's a hierarchical class instrument. So it is something that pushed me over the years into thinking about anarchism. It's something that pushed me towards thinking about immigration more, and there's a number of ways that I can talk about more at some point that I ended up in all these different places. But with regard to immigration, I was deeply involved in the immigrant rights movement for years, and I still am off and on. When I'm thinking about immigration and all of the different things I saw in that struggle in the US, and thinking about statelessness for Black populations in the US, it led to me wanting to also have a deeper conversation about Black history and our relationship to mobility and to movement, because our history in terms of Black people's migrant story, the great migrations that Black people have experienced over the time that we have been in the US, so much of that gets neglected by the immigrant rights movement to the point that it's like just this kind of accepted view that, oh, well, Black Americans have papers, so they're okay. Their struggle's over, or they're protected and they're fine. But so much of Black history is Black people being forced to move, forced migration, whether it's in its current context with regard to gentrification, with regard to being pushed out of communities by corporations, or in a historical context when we're actually chattel slaves and property, and we were going to different parts of the country through forced migrations as slave labor, or during the Reconstruction era when you have so many Black people who are forced to move, seeking better lives. There's so many things I could bring up, and so many aspects of Black history that in the US and across the Americas that are related to migration. Not to mention, there's a deep deportation history. And Black people who were in different parts of the Americas as enslaved Africans were deported to different plantations into different parts of the Americas, the so-called New World, as punishment. So all of this history is just severely overlooked and under discussed, in my opinion. And I wanted to kind of lay a foundation for that in that text, the best I could, just to kind of say, hey, when these ICE attacks start happening, because that fascist apparatus is already there. It had been, extremely expanded by the Obama administration in the years that I was in the immigrant rights movement. And just looking at what it was doing at that time when I was so deeply involved in that work, I was like, oh, okay, I know what this is going to be used for in the future. And now that's what's happening. And it's just really incredibly frustrating, if I can be completely honest with you, because a lot of these things could have been circumvented. But I was just trying to make at least an argument in the text for people to start thinking about and seeing ourselves as Black people that way, so that we could have more solidarity and more understanding with what was coming through federal immigration forces. And that's just one aspect of a few different things. I do still think that there's going to be much more conflict and other things that I mentioned in the text. But it's going to take time for more of these things to play out, and we have to see how it goes.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that Trump himself, I believe, said a number of times was he wanted to outdo Obama in terms of deportation. So, like, Obama, among others, obviously not the only one, but has
Right.
laid the infrastructure for the sort of the monstrosity that we're seeing today. Um, I'm curious though, like one of the things that I'm going to do another episode probably next week with a few folks from Minneapolis because there's been quite a few interesting actions, mutual aid initiatives, just people responding in different ways, including, I mean, as far as I can tell, I've never been there, but just as far as I can tell, people who, were not politicized before. Um, Given the urgency of this moment is so beyond the pale for even your quote unquote apolitical person. Not that I believe one can actually be apolitical, but that's how a lot of people view themselves. Do you see sort of a rupture in what's happening? Do you see maybe the potential for change maybe more than before? What has been your views of yeah, your interpretation of what's been going on, especially as of late?
Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel with regard to the potential for change. And what I mean by
Mm,
that is not that I don't want to sound like I'm saying I don't think that change is going to happen. It's more about when.
right.
I'm not sure when change is going to happen. And one of the things that I worry about is the the sort of liberal status quo is still operating as usual. It's still business as usual. And what I mean by that is people still have the infrastructure of the Democratic Party to keep them invested in the idea that as long as they vote, as long as they hope for a better representative, that things will work out. And as a matter of fact, a number of reactions that you see from people on social media, you hear people say on, in public and other places, is, oh, we should have voted harder, or if only we had been more loyal to the Democratic Party, this would have never happened. There's also people who throw up their hands and they say things like, "Well, I voted for Kamala Harris, so this is what y'all get," and they'll kind of make her into this amazing, like sage, presidential candidate who, if we had just put all of our faith in her and let her lead and be the best black woman that she could have been, then we wouldn't be in this situation. But that's just a complete separation from reality. The road that we are traveling down is the road that this country has been on since its inception. the United States has never been a country that embodies a lot of the ideals and democratic sort of egalitarianism and equality that so many people speak about it embodying. I mean, when we're talking about a number of populations in the United States, we're only looking at, for example, Black people really kind of starting to have the right to participate in the vote and elections within, the last recent decades, truly. And that's
Mhm.
being rolled back because it's never actually been truly secured. So this idea that we're going to be better off if we continue to be better liberals and be truer and more dedicated to believing in this country is still very much something that's in place. And as long as that's there, people are not going to see and overcome and get out of this situation in the ways that they need to. It's there for a reason to keep people in this situation. And it's not something that is tied to one party or the other. A lot of this is getting lost as, the Republicans are just really, really bad. And if they were gone, this wouldn't ever happen. But all of the stage setting for this situation has been bipartisan. And it's unfortunate that people get frustrated when you say that, but it's just the truth. It's the same thing that I was just talking about with the Obama administration and ICE. During those years when we're doing all this organizing in the immigrant rights movement, we were screaming from the rooftops saying, Obama has to stop doing this because it's going to be in the hands of the right wing in the future. And he will have expanded this so much that they're going to be able to do anything that they want with it. And here we are now in this
Mhm.
situation where this is playing out and people have amnesia. When it comes to the
Mhm.
Bush administration and, the war on Iraq and Afghanistan, the invasion, the same thing. People were screaming then saying the Patriot Act, all of these things that were happening post 9/11, the creation of ICE, we don't need to, have these sorts of tools for anyone, for any party. They don't belong in anybody's hands. So rather than discussing, you know, why would this exist at all? It became about party politics. And a lot of people, for a lot of people, this is still about party politics. So it just, as long as people are trapped in all of this stuff, they're not really seeing the bigger picture, which is, we have a ruling class who is interested in our absolute subjugation and destruction. And they're going to control whatever party is in power. So it's hard to think about when something could possibly change as long as people are invested in the party politics and representative democracy.
You know, one of the hard things about being a sort of historian is that you get to read a lot of things from history that seem to be about the present. And like I was opening it up just as you were talking because, for example, think of Aimé Césaire, the post-colonial thinker, who described a society that colonizes as a quote sick society, morally diseased, and then he says that inevitably calls for its Hitler. I think of, for example, Hannah Arendt. I believe she wrote this in the 50s or 60s or something, speaking of this boomerang, which people in like in the humanities would attribute to Michel Foucault, but he wasn't the first one to talk about this. Essentially, like the violence in this case being Europe, would not have been possible were it not for imperialism and colonialism abroad. And we know that the Germans themselves did an entire genocide in Namibia, in modern day Namibia, even before the Holocaust. And just all of these things, I guess it isn't so much of a question here, more of like me thinking out loud because It is a frustrating thing to feel a bit like a Cassandra, the mythical person in ancient Greece that like would predict, was cursed to predict accurately, but also never be believed at the same time.
Mm.
And not that, again, not that, and I'm sure you would agree, not that I'm saying me or you or we or whatever are special in any particular way or whatnot. It's just a certain framework that I do think when it comes to my anarchism or my, to put it very mildly, my skepticism when it comes to power, especially state power, it's almost like if this is not part of the conversation, a healthy skepticism of state power is as like neutrally as I can put it. So much gets lost. So much gets erased. And in fact, like people who don't want to entertain this or maybe don't have the framework for it sort of have to compensate in different ways. They have to fill in the blanks to sort of make sense for of what they're seeing. I don't know. I can't be in people's heads, but it has been, again, to put it a bit mildly here, quite frustrating. And among the many things that has been helping me personally cope with this is your series of essays, actually, Another Way Out. And as a at first, if you have some reflections on this, obviously go for it. And also, I would be curious if you can tell our listeners, who, as I said, I'll include this in the show notes, but your Another Way Out series on Prism that you've been exploring, just to read some of the titles from more recent to like I'm gonna say four or five before that one. You Cannot Just Wait for Tyranny to Go Away is your most recent one. Before that, there was Finding Clarity for Resistance. Before that, there was How Denying Reality Aids Fascism. Before that, Building Resistance When Passivity is the Norm. And then before that, and I'll end here for now, Hiding in Obedience Won't Stop Fascism. And I can see a sort of, I mean, forgive if this is just my interpretation, but a frustration as like maybe the same sort of frustration that's coming out in my own voice now of like there are certain things that we need with all of the disagreements that we can have with so many people on so many different things. I certainly don't claim to have all of the answers, but we do need to recognize certain things, certain through lines. We can't just pretend that something is just in the past and doesn't have consequences on the present, or that something is just abroad, again, to go back to this boomerang thing, and won't have consequences on the present, as if the technologies that I have been testing on these quote unquote foreign populations, that the companies that made a profit doing so won't also need to find ways to make a profit once that specific war ended, let's say. Yeah, I'm throwing a lot at you, but feel free to pick up whichever thread you want.
Of course, of course. I mean, there's something that is at the there's something that's at the basis and the foundation of me writing this column. And ultimately, what I'm trying to do is describe and push and encourage different ways of approaching the predicaments that we're in, not just in the US, but around the world. And the reason that I want us to try to come up with different solutions together is because when you look at how people react to the problems at hand, there's so much prescription that is based off of these sort of contrived recipes that people have for fixing things based on their politics, their ideologies, and their dogmas. So when I kind of approach looking at a situation or an issue, I'm not just trying to sort of reference the same quotes, books, ideas, and standards that other people draw from. So, another way out is largely about looking for another way out through thoughtfulness that isn't rooted in the doctrinaire. And I think that that's especially hard for the sectarian left, which I have spent a large majority of my life being amongst politically. And I say that because I think that the sectarian left has become secular religion, and people have made leftism into something that has much more to do with zealotry than it has to do with intellectual and political and creative rigor. So many of the ideas you hear from people about how to change conditions are based in the thoughts of someone else from the past, and it's sort of just being reconfigured for today. But people in the past were experiencing different conditions and or were in different places, in different contexts and different eras, and what their ideas were about fixing a problem, whatever their ideas were about fixing a problem may have been, those were specific to specific situations. And so you have to carry that with you when you are looking at someone's analysis about what is to be done with regard to anything that you're looking at in your current and contemporary context. So I'm trying to pull from people who are lesser known, overlooked, and also encourage people to embrace history and analysis from below, and really look at having a people's analysis that is not always rooted in top-down vanguardist and politician and like great man, great revolutionary type history. So listening to hear those things that maybe haven't been heard as much. That's what I want to do. And I want to translate that and I want to interpret it in my own way and share it with other people and see what we can come up with together. So, we were just, well, you just mentioned someone who I take a lot of inspiration from, who is quite well known, actually, Amy Césaire. But Amy Césaire talked about things being at an impasse in his resignation from the French Communist Party.
Mm-hmm.
And he said it didn't mean that there wasn't any way out. And so that's one of the places that I take inspiration for the name of the column, because there there are still ways out of this situation. There's still a number of options. There's still things that we can do, and all is not lost. So, in order to get there, we're going to have to ask some different questions. We're going to have to look for some different answers. And so much of my understanding of that comes from the work that I do with regard to Black anarchism, which I'm not treating as some sort of sectarian promotion, but rather when I analyze and think of the history of Black anarchism, which has also been severely neglected, I'm looking at a number of people who were former Black Panthers, who were former civil rights activists, Black radicals who turned towards anarchism because they realized that they needed to be asking different questions and be looking for different answers. So their example gives me the example that I use to analyze history and to look at the present and to try to have, again, this intellectual and political rigor that I feel like is lacking amongst a lot of the people who would self-describe themselves as revolutionaries, radicals, and so on and so forth.
And given that you've been doing this for a while, like this years, I mean, have you gotten different reactions that you think are interesting that have maybe evolved over time, or are you still seeing just a reluctance to engage with the broader topic, if that makes sense?
Honestly, the column it gets a lot of love. I,
That's
I, I
amazing.
I'm honestly blown away by the amount of love that I get from people who read it regularly. Prism shows so much love. The team there is amazing and supportive, and I appreciate them giving me the space to have the column and to be able to do something that feels really important to me at this time like that. And yeah, I mean, I don't actually get a lot of pushback because so many people I think are looking around at how bad things are and are opening their mind to hearing different perspectives and looking at different things. So it's yeah, it's honestly generally pretty positive.
That's good to know. Um, I have been wondering about this just because the topics maybe is not what many people are used to. Well, maybe not that's not fair to say not used to thinking about, but maybe the framework is not one that many people are used to. But I mean, it's a good sign, I think, if you're getting a lot of love. I was just curious about that. Um, More broadly, I know you wanted us also to what you suggested that we it'd be good to talk about grief. I've mentioned this in the previous episodes, or the one that's before this one, but I've been dealing with my own set of griefs as of late, including what's called pre-grieving, such I have a loved one who is dying just very slowly, but we know it's coming. Um, why did you want to talk about it? Is there, or let me put it this way. Do you see a link between grieving in a certain way or grief as it is and the sort of politics you're interested in?
Yeah, I mean, you wanted to talk about hope too, right?
Yeah. And
So I
the way they contrast with one another, or at the very least the way they link to one another, I guess.
well, if we're starting with grief, because I have a
Mm-hmm.
lot to say about grief and I have a lot to say about hope too. But
Mm-hmm.
if we're starting with grief, I think that it's important because so much of uh, the things that so many of the things that I'm thinking about these days are related to the ways that people deal with grief and with grievance. And when you look at my people, Black people in the US, I think that a lot of the tendency to go toward certain ideas about what we need to do as people are related to how we're reacting to grievance and to our grief. And I think that if you don't handle it carefully, that it can actually become the fuel for reactionary politics. And one of the best examples of that is the state of Israel. So when you look at the grievance as it relates to the the Holocaust in Europe and everything that was unimaginably horrific that the Nazis did, you know, it's hard to comprehend the amount of post-traumatic stress and trauma and pain that so many of us carry in our bodies. And when you're thinking about how it gets passed on from generation to generation, you get a better understanding of how we ended up with the genocide that's being carried out against the Palestinians. You get a better understanding of how people justify some of the most egregious, terrible, just mind-boggling crimes that you could ever think of. And I think that if we have a better relationship to grief and to managing how we approach our pain and the trauma that we are confronted with, that we're expected to go on living with, that it could actually serve us well in not repeating a number of the terrible horrors and atrocities of the past. And so, with regard to myself, I have not only experienced grief and pain and trauma as as a person who is a member of a group of people who have historical trauma and plight and oppression. I've experienced on an interpersonal level too in a number of ways on and including losing my parent, my mother, who was the most important person in my life. My pride and inspiration is coming from the woman who I learned so much from and who birthed me and who taught me how to navigate this world. Just experiencing grief in the interpersonal, but also having it be a deep part of my family history and having it be a big part of the identity that I have as a Black American. It's there's so many levels and layers to it, and they feed into each other and they're amplified by one another because that interpersonal level is obviously connected to the much broader, bigger part of life and as it relates to my identity. They're not separate. So I have to look at them and think about them and approach them carefully. And I wanted to talk about it with you because you had shared some of the things that you were going through before we got the chance to talk today. And my condolences because I know what it means to go through watching someone deteriorate, watching someone get ready to pass away. I know what it feels like to be a
Mm.
caretaker. I know what it feels like to have to work multiple jobs. To I know what it feels like to be poor. I know what it feels like to feel like everything's unfair, and all of these different things that can come with these situations. But I wanted to just share that it is possible to come out on the other side okay, and it's possible to not let these things turn us inward so much that it develops into a rot and it develops into a toxicity that can lead us to unjust and oppressive and dangerous thinking.
And I suppose well, first, thank you so much for sharing this. And the link, for me, it's gotten to the point, I think, if that's not too presumptuous for me to say, where I'm. So let me put it this way: when I was still dealing with grief, and I mean it's still ongoing. It's not a linear process, obviously. Um, it helped me a lot to read of, for example, James Baldwin, and when he was talking about the people that he lost, thinking of him being gone, like as the loss that is. And even at some point, I went through a kind of a phase for a few weeks where I was listening to like podcasts by a it's called the Griefcast. It's no longer active. By a comedian here, it's here in the UK. By a comedian who also lost, I believe it was her father, and talking to other people who lost loved ones and whatnot. And because there's kind of this comedy angle to it, making not light off necessarily, but finding the funny in the absurd and the horrible and the whatever, obviously in a very personal way. That has also helped me. But I always think of this, and maybe this like, segues into the hope component of this. I always think of this clip that it makes the round every now and then of James Baldwin, basically saying like you cannot tell a child that there is no hope. And in fact, it's this interesting thing that even the most I don't know, cynical doomer among us, whatever terms we want to use, these are not perfect words among us. And it's something I mean, I've experienced this. People I know, when confronted with a kid, somehow like we don't want to tell them that. Or I think there's a part of us that still does believe in hope, if that's a correct framing. Hope for me is a discipline, as I think listeners would know by now. But yeah, go. I'm rambling a bit, but in terms of the hope in this moment
Mhm.
that we're going through, and feel free to focus on the yes if you want, or whatever. How have you been approaching it?
Well, hope is such a huge subject, and
Mm,
I was actually really appreciative of you wanting to have me on to talk about it too, as well as these other things, because I oftentimes don't get to talk about um, subjects like this as much as I'd like to.
mm,
And first and foremost, I think I have to go back to me talking about being descended from slaves. Um, you know, being a person with that family history, with that relationship to um, the past, it informs uh, my relationship with not just with not just grievance, but hope, because I'm also thinking about, motivation and inspiration too. And whenever I talk about liberation, I always mention that it's something that I don't imagine or describe in too much detail, because I think that that's a misstep. And I think that when you get stuck on trying to name or get stuck on nomination, that it actually does a disservice to thinking about like what liberation could be. So I often use the example of how enslaved people might have thought that just being able to read or to eat what they wanted or to travel freely was maybe liberation to them. But we have a number of those things now, and that they didn't, and we're still not liberated. So with that in mind, I analyze hope as a component of like an aspiration grounded in reality and circumstance. So what you hope for, I would say, could very well have everything to do with what you lack, and what you lack could be unreasonable. It could be unfair. It could be disproportionate. And at the same time, hope is filled with so much possibility. So the things I have now that my ancestors did not aren't just indicators of achievement or some liberatory completion. Obviously, I just said, this isn't finished, but it's also a testament to how far we've come, and that hoping for more isn't unreasonable. And actually, sometimes betterment and progress they're just right around the corner. They might be coming much sooner than you even have would have anticipated. So my relationship to hope is understanding the incomplete struggle, the perpetual struggle that so many people have engaged in for me to get to this point where I'm at, and the struggle that we're still supposed to be engaged in to carry things forward so that future generations have more than we would have hoped for. That's a big part of it for me. So it's like, I'm telling you, I'm coming from people who dreamed, who hoped to be able to just go to school, to just go to school. It's like that's not that's that, that's a few grandparents, that's a couple grandparents ago.
Yeah.
It's not like super far off. These are people you could reach out and touch, and it's important to me to center that when I'm talking about hope and when I'm thinking about hope. And it really puts things in perspective and brings the whole, conversation full circle for me because, when I look at folks who are throwing up their hands and, I wrote about this in Another Way Out in the column. I talked about seeing Black people who would say something like, well, I went and voted. I did my part. Like, I don't have anything. I'm not fighting for anything anymore. And I'm like, that's like, we come from ancestors who didn't have the luxury of saying that. Like there are people who fought tooth and nail to be able to get us to this point so that we could continue to fight for the folks who are going to come after us. And I think that it's just actually really disrespectful and neglectful towards the Black radical tradition to not have a critical and complex relationship with hope. And I'm not just talking about happy feelings and saying everything's going to be all right and that there's a beautiful sunset on the horizon. I'm just talking about, that disciplinary aspect that you mentioned that Miriam Kaba has very much popularized with her quote, "Hope is a discipline." It it is an everyday practice that is something that's what she's pointing out when she says hope is a discipline, and it's a major key to understanding what we're supposed to be doing as people, as people working towards something that is a big part of progress for everyone, not just ourselves.
Well, I mean, this I think perfectly brings us full circle, as you said. I mean, my friend, I can only always do this, and we can do this for hours and hours. But at least for our present purposes, can you tell our listeners, A, where they can find you? Plug your stuff, and are there any upcoming projects that we should be paying attention to?
Of course, of course. Yeah, I mean, these days I am very skeptical about social media. Would say, look for me on Blue Sky if you'd like. My handle on there is William C. Son. And if you want to reach out to me anytime, you can email me. My email's on my website. And I would also tell people to check out Offshoot Journal. Offshoot Journal is a journal that I co-founded with Unsung Kim, and we have been working to try to also create a lot of different political education and art and awareness that fits into a lot of the themes that we've discussed today. So I would encourage people to check out Offsuit Journal as well. And yeah, I'm just always appreciative of you. This was really, really good to be able to talk about, and I appreciate you making the time.
Same here. I appreciate everything that you do, and I'm sure we'll be doing this again. And hopefully, we don't have to wait 4 more years before we do another episode.
No, I'd love to
Um,
talk anytime, whenever you're ready.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, William.
Of course, thank you.